So, cool things I learned about you last night. You wanted to be a punk, but you were the right age to be a disco queen.
That's right. Sadly, I fell in the cusp between being a hippie and a punk, and disco was the only answer, really. That marks my vintage. We'll go no further into that.
And you once graciously allowed a theater troupe from Poland to crash at your place during the Fringe Festival.
This was a wonderful Polish theatre company called Keynote 2, who were run by an incredible Polish artist, theatre director called Thaddeus Kantor, and we lived in a very big house near Edinburgh, and we didn't have any money. We just lived in a big house, and this troupe were arriving, and the guy who organised their arrival didn't know what to do with them because they didn't have any money. So my mum decided that she would put them all up in our house, and the entire troupe, along with the what was called the Paggot, who was the sort of inbuilt spy, came along in the bus. And my brother tried to take a picture of the bus, and he was prevented. So all we have is a picture of the bus's wheels as a memento. But actually, it's really relevant because that moment, I think I must have been about 16 or 17 at the time, this entire troupe came to stay with us, and we got completely involved. In fact, I nearly went off and ran away with the circus, and joined them. But that moment, that thing of having a big event going on around me, just made me think, life is too short to be bland. Let's do things and do special things. And so, in a way, I always think of that moment as the moment that got me into film and into doing amazing productions. So,
I presently have a theater troupe from Zimbabwe staying at my house for the Atlantic Fringe Festival. So we really bonded over this. And both of those theater companies won the best show.
Yeah.
Is what's
Mine
truly
was a long time ago.
We are good hosts.
Yeah.
There you go. So let's talk about that's inspiration. What was your entree into film production?
Through festival first. I did love movies always, and would dress myself up so I could go and sneak into 18 movies when I was 12, things like that. I just was a bit of an addict early on, but I never thought that it would be something I could be involved in. But when I was at university, I was encouraged to go and get myself involved with the Edinburgh Film Festival, and as I said last night at the entrance to the Angel's Share, I wrote to Linda Miles, who was running the festival, 3 times, and the third year, she said, "Yeah, you can come." And this was just to volunteer. You had to. Anyway, so I did get in, and I worked on the program and invented publicity for them, and our box office went up. So then I got invited back the next year, and I got really into the film people and watching the movies, and it was just fantastic. And then after leaving university, I went and worked in the theatre with the same guy who brought the Polish theatre to our house. So it's all very incestuous to this point. And so I worked in the theatre in admin for a couple of years, and then I thought, this is inside too much. I want to get outside. I like doing too many other things. It was too limited what the theatre had to offer me. And I saw in a small ad, an ad for a one-week film production course. So I left my job and went to do this 1-week film production course, and that was my epiphany. That was it. As soon as I got my hands on the camera, that was absolutely it. I made such a bad film that week. But I thought, but I organized it quite well. It happened, So they then employed me because I already, through working in the theatre and the film festival, I'd already got to know a lot of people, and so they needed people to come and do their course, so they employed me. And I ended up producing these appallingly bad short films for 6 months, which was a really good apprenticeship. But then I managed to get work on a a very low-budget feature film, and then I did my real apprenticeship was 2 years working on a kids series for Channel 4. It was commission number 3 for Channel 4 in the UK, and it was a multicultural kids series filmed on 16mm all over the UK in different urban centres, and it was, you know, kids in their own environments, and it was a sort of antidote to what kids programming had been until then, and it meant just, you know, being a sort of documentary crew. We did little bits of drama. We worked with actors and telling stories and things, and it was a beautiful series, and that was a genuine apprenticeship, and it's just the perfect all-round way to learn about production. So that was my real
Did you not come to feature production through the locations department?
Well, after that, I then left, and that series finished, and I went freelance, and I knew that I wanted to do feature films, so I knew I could only do production, so I just offered my services as production manager, location manager, and the second film I did was My Beautiful Laundrette, which was Working Title's first film, and I was invited to see Stephen Frears, who was the director, and he said, "Well, I suppose I have to employ you because you seem to know everybody, Rebecca." He said, like, you know the writer Hanif Qureshi because you nicked his job when you went and worked in the theatre, and you pushed him out into the bookshop, and then he started writing. You know the coordinator because she's your cousin. You know the designer because you went to dancing classes with him in the borders of Scotland when you were 5. So I suppose I have to have you. So that was a really good break, because My Beautiful Laundrette was a real milestone in, well, it was the first film Working Title meant.
This means you found the laundrette in My Beautiful Laundrette. You realize this makes you a gay goddess. Yeah, I mean, it does mean that I have, yes, absolutely, iconic status in the gay world. It was so much fun, that film. It was also incredibly risky. I did spend, as location manager, one of my jobs was to tell them when a good train was coming, you know, because there's a lot of close train work in that film. And I nearly got arrested by sitting on a platform with a walkie-talkie saying, "There's a good train coming," but I actually sat on the roof of a high-rise building so I could see Victoria Station, and I could tell, I worked out which trains were going to pass. Not suspicious at all.
Anyway, that's the sort of thing that you do when you get to be in production, and that's what makes it fun.
And your first film as a producer?
Was a film called Friendship's Death. It was a film directed by Peter Wallen, who's a structural semiologist, really, I suppose. And he and his partner, Laura Mulvey, had made some...
I'll pause. Tell us what a structural semiologist is.
Well, I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest.
So he was a self-proclaimed structural
semiologist? Well, he actually wrote a popular book, a book that is popular amongst film intellectuals at colleges.
There are none of those here.
No, I know, which is why I'm explaining it in depth. It's called Signs and Meanings in the Cinema. It's actually rather good. Anyway, Peter was an intellectual, and he made a few films, and this was his last film. And it was a story about a journalist who was covering Black September in Amman in Jordan. And he comes across this strange Western woman roaming the streets of Amman. And he takes her under his wing because she shouldn't be in these streets. And anyway, the journalist was played by Bill Patterson, and the strange Western woman, and it transpires over the course of the 2 weeks of their conversations when they're holed up in the hotel together that she's in fact an alien, was played by Tilda Swinton.
Perfect.
Good casting. And that was her first main role. So that was the first film I produced, and And it was very, very low budget, and we shot it all in the studio, and I absolutely loved doing it. And then the second thing I did was a TV series for Working Title, a big fat beach book by Maeve Binchy in Ireland. And it was, Maeve, bless her soul, she died recently. It was just a dream to work with, and it was wonderful to get her first book onto the screen. Anyway, doing the Maeve Binchy book got me, made me Working Title's Irish expert, and they were doing a film with Ken Loach in Ireland. So I was the obvious choice to go and be, even though I don't know, Maeve Binchy to Ken Loach isn't the obvious route, but that meant that Ken and I got together. And in fact, the film that we were due to make in Ireland never happened. They pulled the plug because the writers and Ken all disagreed. I think Ken was trying to make The Wind That Shakes the Barley out of which is a political film, out of a romantic novel, and it just wasn't going to happen. So we got to about 4 weeks away from shooting, and they pulled the plug, which meant that Ken and I were both out of a job. And I'd actually really been interested in the way he wanted to work, and it's a different way of working. And I thought this was really an interesting, different way of doing things. So I really like Ken, and I knew, he had a history before him, and he'd already made amazing things like Hess and Kathy Come Home and Days of Hope, and so for me he was a hero. But he'd been in the doldrums for 10 Thatcher years, and so it was just great to suddenly find myself with Ken, and he had a script under his arm and said, would I like to try and get it off the ground? I have to say, at this point, I had never raised money for a film. I'd always been the person who gets the thing made, but I'd never actually raised money. So we sort of put a pin in the map of Soho and found one, Eric Fellner, who wasn't with Working Title at the time, who said he would help us get the money for.
So one of the greatest collaborative relationships in independent cinema was born out of failure and desperation.
Of course. The only way. It is the driver. I gotta get something made.
Well, that gives us all hope, I'm sure. So international co-production is the reason we are here. I think Jan's only true brilliance in getting me to talk to you at 9 o'clock in the morning is that I've never done one. So I'm a really good person to ask questions about them.
You do them out of necessity, like desperation.
Okay, we have a theme. Desperation and necessity is our theme. So your very first international co-production
was the second film I did with Ken Loach, which was, it's an obvious co-production. It was a film set about the Spanish Civil War called Land and Freedom. And because the film was set in Spain, we thought it might be good to have some Spanish partners. And so the way we went about it was, we had to shoot the thing there. It just seemed rude to go in any other way than with the support.
That's how I would have done it.
There was logic. So cleverly, my exec producer, who ran the company Parallax Pictures that Ken and I had become part of, in between making Hidden Agenda and doing Land and Freedom, I'd taken a couple of years off to have a baby and got out of sync with Ken, and he'd made a couple of films with Sally Hibbin at Parallax. So what we did was we took one of those films was going to a Spanish film festival, and Sally and another colleague from Parallax went to the festival, and one of the purposes of going was to seek a potential partner. It made sense. The film was going to be at Valladolid, and so at the festival, and so it seemed a good place to find partners. And the core idea for finding the partner would be that they had to be people that you were really happy having dinner with, and that they would stay up as long as you could. I think the gauge was, sort of equal length of time at the bar would be the equation that would lead to co-production partnership.
Okay, so let's recap. They need to be a good dinner date, so share the same basic tastes in cuisine.
And film.
And, okay. They need to stay up as late as you and be as drunk as you to enter into a co-production agreement.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And what happened was they met, Sally and Sarah met Uli Felsberg, who ran road movies, the Wim Wenders company at the time. And Uli was a German film producer, and Uli introduced Sally to Gerardo Herrero from Tornasol Pictures in Spain. The other key element was the fact that both companies were very similar in size and makeup to our own Parallax Pictures.
Right.
And that was the key thing. We sought people who were similar to ourselves, similar sort of tastes, similar level in the sort of pantheon of film producers in Europe. So, and that meeting, meeting those potential co-producers, the Tornasol went on, and Road Movies went on, and Uli went on to work with us for the next 15 years. That was a very good way of bonding, and it was the right way. I mean, Sally moved on, and I took over the role of putting together the co-production.
Now, does this selection system ever backfire? Because I can already tell there's a lot of people now planning to go to dinner, stay up late, and get shit-faced tonight. Any warnings?
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is, if you want to go to bed because they're boring you, then go to bed, and then that's not going to be a co-production. I think that's the way to gauge it. And I just think happiness with these people is key. It hasn't backfired yet. It will, I'm sure. There'll be, but I mean, Uli and Gerardo were great partners for a long, long time, and actually through Uli, I learnt about financing movies myself, because he showed me how he had co-produced other films. I mean, this wasn't invented with, in the early 90s when we did it. There were our other European partners were already doing it because it made sense. I mean, the British have that axis with because they speak English, they have the
axis of evil.
The axis of evil, i.e., the English-speaking ex-colonial countries and the America North, USA, I think it's called. There's
no, America North is Canada.
I'm pretty sure. Okay. But that's an ex-colonial country.
Indeed.
So it fills both brackets.
Hardly ex.
It fills both. Anyway, so because we speak the same language, we tend to partner, and in that direction, and we hadn't done enough of exploring of our own nearest partners in Europe, and to be honest, this is a criticism of the US rather than of Canada, but I found I was culturally, even though I didn't speak their languages very well, I found myself culturally more at ease with European partners than with certainly Hollywood partners. It wasn't my makeup to be a Hollywood type person, so I found that working with European partners was great. And the other thing we did was we brought in, to make Land and Freedom, we also brought in, we found pre-sales from companies that had already been buying or distributing Ken's films. So we found partners in Italy and France to top to come in on top of the German and Spanish. So in that one film, I sort of spread my European wings, and that was the only way. The film was, up until then, we'd been making films from one or two sources. This was a lot of sources because it was a bigger budget film, and we needed to have the money to make it, and we could only make it with those partners. So.
And can there be too many sources and too many partners?
We had 21 partners on The Wind That Shakes the Barley, and it did feel rather a lot. Perhaps too many, but you're desperate to get the film made. So if it makes the film, it's not too many.
Speaking of Hollywood, when I was asking people what I should ask you, the recurring question, the only recurring question was, why the hell did Mr. Bean talk in the movie?
I know, it's terrible, isn't it? Yeah, for my sins, I produced the first Mr. Bean film for working title. It was a purely pecuniary concept that I should go and do it. I was out of sync with Ken. I wasn't going to do Carla's Song, which was the last film he did with Sally Hibbin, because it was set in Nicaragua, and I'm allergic to mosquitoes, so I thought I better not go to Nicaragua. And so I didn't do that film, but I needed to earn some money. So Working Title asked if I would produce Bean, and yeah, he spoke. Ooh, ouch, he should never have spoken.
So was that the Hollywood influence you're talking about?
Yeah, well, my job on that film was to maintain the Britishness of Bean. I had the scariest interview ever for that job, actually. I was interviewed by, interviewing people were Tim Bevan from Working Title, Richard Curtis, Mel Smith, who was the comedian who was to direct it, and Rowan Atkinson. I mean, for British comedy,
terrifying,
scare, that was frightening. But I got the job. I don't know, I must have just been sort of the least scared of the candidates or something. But that was quite scary, going into a room with those comedy heroes. I mean, and I know nothing about comedy, but I certainly knew a lot about it by the end of that film, and I thought, ooh, I'm not sure I want to do that again. It's such an exacting process, comedy. It's really scary. It's just takes so long to get it right. And Mr. Bean, oh God, he's painful. And he speaks. Oh, he really shouldn't have. But there was a lot of discussion about how he should speak when he did speak.
Well, it was a great big hit.
It was a great hit.
All
And
those
yeah, and you know, the ratings at the Olympic opening ceremony were the highest when Mr. Bean plays Chariots of Fire. You know, amazing.
So let's talk about what you do love to do. I'm sure everyone wants to hear about the creative process, your relationship with Ken Loach, Angel Share. It seems like a very unique creative process to work with Ken.
Well, it's not just Ken. It's Paul Laverty, the writer, as well, and that's essential. I mean, you know, I think we sort of feel like we're three parts of a tripod, and it's you can't make a film without that core. And when the core of that core really works well together and happily together, then you just have you're working with your mates, and it's just really good fun, and we have such a laugh. And it's as Mel Smith said to me when he was working at the BBC doing comedy, he said that they would spend all day doing comedy and end up in the canteen absolutely exhausted and sort of dripping over their beers, and in would come the drama people, all slapping each other on the back and laughing and all that. And that's what we have with Ken. It's always a good laugh. And the cutting room particularly, we've got the worst comedian in the world as our editor, Jonathan Morris, and Ken becomes like a schoolboy all over again when he's ensconced with Jonathan. And I tell you what it is, it's like going onto the set of Carry On film. It's anything is innuendo. I was in there the day before yesterday, and it's almost like you have to get prepared for going in for whatever you say is a double entendre. It's just, that's the way Ken is. He's not the serious heavyweight you think he is. But we have a lot of fun making the films. He's got a really interesting way of the process is fascinating. We shoot in sequence. We cast people who are right for the part. I raise the money on Ken as the star, not on the stars as the stars. And so any actor who comes on board is on board because they want to work with Ken. And that's fantastic. And we try and keep the films low budget or lower budget. I mean, we never made a film over £5 million, and we won't. And because it means that we can keep control of it over it. And as co-productions, it's basically about divide and rule. You know, you basically spread the bets, get as many people on board as possible so that you can be in charge, because you can just dilute the executive power of commissioning editors. You see, that's the secret plan behind it all.
Ha. So if there are a ton of partners, none of them are particularly vested.
Exactly.
And you can dominate them.
Exactly. So that's the secret of our success.
Right.
And but also keeping the budget low so that nobody's put in too much money to feel that they've really made a boo-boo if they aren't in control of it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's good, and that formula also, because we've had regular distributors around Europe and places, they've sort of spread their bets over the years, and because we've made so many films, some work and some don't, but they know that for a relatively small investment, they'll get another one that works every so often. So it means that we've got room to try the more difficult films, and then we can come in with something more populist like The Angel's Share. So the one before was an out-and-out failure at the box office, called a film about contractors in Iraq and post-traumatic stress, and I think there were 3 jokes in the whole film. So that was a bit of a disaster, but it was still an important film that we wanted to make, and it has its own audience. It's found an audience in its own way, and so to be able to make the more difficult films, you have to. It's been good to have continuing relationships with people.
So along with your very long-term creative collaborations, you have distribution partners that you go to time and time again.
Yes, or they shift, and our co-producing partners have shifted, and we've added people and taken them away in the way that you add crew and take people away as people change and want to do different things. So, for instance, when we did Looking for Eric, we ended up with a whole new set of partners. Our French co-producers, we co-produced directly with France for the first time on that film, and that brought me into a different area of co-producing, where the French took over a lot of the work and started to actually cash flow our productions. France is our best territory. The Ken Loach films are huge in France, and The Angel's Share has already reached over 700,000 admissions since it opened. So it's just like an amazing place for us. The French love us. We still don't know why, but we still give them our films.
You're very lovable.
We try.
So I'm sure a lot of producers in the room are wondering, in approaching an accomplished and successful producer like yourself with a co-production, what do you like to see in somebody's proposal, presentation? What attracts you to a project?
Well, the story is the main thing, always. And whether or not, I mean, we haven't done many other people's films, although we have co-produced with our French partners, and it's always either to help somebody out because they're supporting us. It's a two-way process, and if we can then help them because we're working with them and they're helping us, then if we can help them, and so we did the English end of one of Why Not, our French partners' productions a couple of years ago, and we wanted to do it wholeheartedly. We wanted to really make that film work for them because they'd been so good to us. So I think it's a two-way street.
Reciprocity is the key.
That's the word. I knew you'd have it.
I'm told that nobody ever asks questions at these morning sessions from the audience, which is you. I say we break that terrible tradition, and I call on you, sir. Yes, for a question.
Your favorite Ken Loach experience, your favorite on-set with anecdote and tell us.
Oh, God.
The question is seeking a favorite Ken Loach on-set anecdote or incident or gossip?
There are just so many. The thing about Ken, I mean, he's well into his 70s now, but I'm just thinking immediately of a runner who came up to me when we were filming The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which was in 2006. Now, Ken must have just hit 70. In fact, he had his 70th birthday on that shoot. And I remember this runner came up to me one day and said, I want to make a complaint. And I said, well, what about? And you're the runner. What would you like to make? I'm not taking this attitude from Ken Loach. And I said, what? He said, he really bullied me. He told me to run. I said, you're the runner. And Ken really gets annoyed when people don't do their job. and this guy just would amble. He didn't run. And Ken just lost it with this guy. He just, because Ken runs around. And when we were shooting, there's an ambush sequence in The Wind That Shakes the Barley. And we did it in this valley, and you've got like 4 different parts of the militia, or the flying column, each about a quarter of a mile apart. And Ken, rather than using the walkie-talkie, was running from one lot to the other, over bog and everything. And so, this stroppy runner telling you, losing it, and wanting to complain about his treatment because he wasn't running, took the biscuit. But Ken isn't. He's pretty nice on set, and I mean, I think the worst thing about Ken are the jokes, actually. But, I mean, I'm sure every film there's some anecdote, but yes, the runner complaining about Ken was great.
Does anybody else have a question about anything? Hi.
New non-Ken Loach projects. Well, there are very few, and I think people that I work with who aren't Ken tend to get quite short shrift, because obviously the main business I do is make Ken's films, and Ken has been very prolific. So I guess the things that I've worked on that have been non-Ken films during the period I've worked with him have been, I mean, it's always friends. It's always people that I'm close to who've come with ideas and developed ideas with me. And I don't think there's anything that I've done which hasn't been as a result of a friend, filmmaker, developing something with me. And I've got a TV series which I'm developing with a friend writer, and I've put him together with a friend director, all people I've known for ages, and it seems to be a good combination. So I've got them doing something, and I've got. But
so the
also,
next question is, how do they become your friend?
I don't know. How does anybody become your friend? It's just people that you've got to know over the years, and I don't know. I mean, the friend who's a writer actually, in fact, the friend who's doing the TV series I did a film called Princesa, which was a co-production in, it was an Italian film, Brazilian director, German support and British support, and it's about transsexual prostitutes in Milan.
So you're friends?
Yeah. And Henrique, who was the director, the Brazilian director, sort of got to know all these creatures, people, amazing people, when he was working in Italy, and so wanted to make a film about them. But Henrique decided that he wanted me to produce this. So he courted me to be his friend for like 6 years to persuade me to produce this film. And he even found a really bad Italian producer, who shall remain nameless, who...
We can just look at the credits.
No.
Didn't work out.
The name isn't on the credits.
That bad?
That
Wow.
bad.
That's bad.
And just to show me how badly it could possibly be done, so that I had to come on board as the producer. That was cruel. Anyway, yeah, they're always friends. I can't. I've never made a film without somebody who's not a friend somehow. Well, it's difficult to make a film with an enemy, wouldn't it be?
I've done it. Anybody else? Oh, so many questions now. Hi.
Longest number of shooting days. Well, he likes to. We tend to shoot 5-day weeks, and we tend to try and do it in 6 weeks. We tend to try and. There's an energy if you do it fast, but it's 6 or 7 weeks. I think Barley, or actually Land and Freedom was 8 weeks, because we had to run around Spain like mad, and so I think that was the longest we ever did. But the longest I've ever shot was 13 weeks on a TV series, but that's like interminable.
We had a couple more hands up. Hi. A schedule of workshopping the script.
We have an absolute. I mean, it's interesting. We do a lot of. Our films seem quite improvised, but there actually is a very rigorous script behind it. And what we do, the actors aren't allowed to see the script. The actors don't read the script. They have to trust that they're coming on board, and that we tell them who they're going to be in the film. And we'll do rehearsal with them for a couple of weeks, but not doing something from the script, but doing maybe doing improvisations around the sort of character that they might be, the sort of dilemmas that character that might relate to that character in the film. But we don't go to the script. We also give them, like, if somebody's a teacher, we put them in school for a week or two. If we have an army or a militia, they do boot camp for a couple of weeks, and singing, communal singing, that bonds people, you see, and things like that. So we do that sort of rehearsal, and then when we shoot, we give them a couple of pages in advance each day, or leading up to. And we keep all their scripts under lock and key, and then sometimes we don't give them the whole page, so that if there's a surprise, we won't tell them what that surprise is. We'll tell maybe somebody else, but we won't tell them, and so we actually get to film the surprise as it happens. It's called being loached if you get surprised. So I don't know if any of you have seen Looking for Eric, but it's a film with the footballer Eric Cantona is like appears as a spectre to little Eric, who's going through a midlife crisis, and he's a huge Manchester United football fan, and his hero was Eric Cantona, and so he talks to this poster of Eric Cantona on the wall, and then Eric appears to him and gives him very sage advice as to how he should continue his life. And we didn't tell Steve Everts, who plays little Eric in the film, that actually Eric Cantona was going to be in the film. And so one day when he's talking to the poster, we smuggle Eric Cantona into the room, and he answers back. And that was the first time that Steve knew that Eric Cantona was in the film, and that was prime loaching. That was, and it was amazing. He said it was like a very short acid trip.
We had just a couple more hands. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you've been co-producing for 10, 15, maybe 20 years now. I'm just wondering how the landscape has changed, like your strategy has changed, because now the sales market has become much more tough. There are several countries in Europe in which you're co-producing, for instance, Spain has become, the economic context is that much more difficult. So is your strategy still to sort of divide and rule, or do you have a new strategy, really to put in something new in terms of making those co-productions possible?
The landscape has definitely changed, and with the British tax credit, it's made it much more difficult to co-produce, because you have to the tax credit only applies to money that you use and consume in England or Scotland, and So you can't get the tax credit, you can't get your own input into a film that you film abroad. So it's made it much more difficult to partner with European partners. So having said that, most of our European partners do financing co-productions, or, for instance, I've moved on to Belgium, and their tax break, I mean, what we do with them is we've been, and I did this with Germany, with a German film fund as well, we spend money on goods and services which we bring into the UK, so we film with equipment and film stock and take part of the crew from there. It's really great working with other Europeans on the crew. So we might have a couple of people in the camera department and lighting department from one place. So there are always ways of doing it. There are, you know, if you have studio work, we don't. But if you have studio work, working in or a post-production work in another country, those are ways of doing it. But the strategy has changed a bit also because when we did Looking for Eric, we shifted to the French co-production, and theirs is a financing-only co-production, but they've managed to get us into the exclusiveness of the French club, and because our films do well in France, it's our best territory. So it seems to be right that we should be able to co-produce with the French. So we have had to shift and change, and Spain is a tragedy in a way because we'd love to keep producing with them, but we find it really difficult because they can never honor their agreements. I mean, they've suffered worse from piracy, really. So that's a problem. Do
we have a final over here?
Nope.
Nope. Jan says
no.
No final questions. So, okay, the key is get drunk tonight and never tell your actors what's going to happen, and then they don't really have to act and they'll be brilliant.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Thank you, Rebecca O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much.